hum of my rig's diesel engine was my only companion as I drove through a desolate stretch of interstate. It was the kind of isolation only a long-haul trucker could either love or loathe. My trailer was filled with car parts bound for some dealership warehouse across the country. The dashboard was my ecosystem, cluttered with coffee cups, receipts, and a new dash cam I had installed for safety and insurance purposes. After endless miles of empty road, I reached a trucker park, a barren place consisting of a gravel lot with a few derelict 18-wheelers scattered here and there. No amenities, no Wi-Fi, just a place to park and get some sleep without the interference of highway patrol. Night had fallen, and the sky was a canvas of darkness, dotted only by the faintest stars. I leaned back in my seat, now a makeshift bed, and wrapped myself in a worn-out blanket. I thought about reviewing the dash cam footage from a minor bump I had on the freeway a couple of days ago. The insurance company would need it, but fatigue took over, and in minutes I was asleep, the silence outside enveloping my rig like a shroud. I woke up to the raw light of dawn, a grayish hue that made everything look devoid of life. My eyes felt gritty from lack of proper sleep. I glanced at the dash cam. It was still there, silently recording. With a sigh, I reached for my laptop and connected the dash cam to upload the footage. A file for each day was neatly time-stamped. I clicked on the one corresponding to the minor bump. The footage was mundane, endless stretches of road, sporadic cars, and then the collision. I was about to close the video when I noticed another file. It was time-stamped around 3 a.m., right when I was in deep sleep in this very parking lot. Clicking on it, the footage revealed the interior of my cab. The door opened noiselessly, and a dark figure slithered in like a shadow. My heart turned to ice. They rummaged through my belongings, my wallet, a stack of old receipts, a family photo, and then they picked up my pocket knife. They examined the blade, the edges glinting ominously under the dim dashboard light. They put the knife back carefully and then turned its focus on me, still asleep in the corner of the frame. Their stare lingered as if contemplating some terrible act. Finally, they left, exiting the cab as stealthily as it had entered. The video ended. A wave of dread washed over me. I looked around, scanning the emptiness of the trucker park. I was alone, or so it seemed. It was the last run of the day, the sun's light already dwindling. I was with my friends, still high on adrenaline, ready for one final descent. Breaking away from the pack, I spotted a sweet tree run with some untouched powder. I headed straight for it. I glanced back at the piste, to the distant figures of my gang, becoming mere specks against the snow. At first the powder was perfect, a dream for any snowboarder. But then I felt it, the snow beneath me turning treacherous, loose and granular as if turning against me. Before I could adjust, my board caught an edge and sent me sprawling. A miscalculated turn, a slip, and the ground rose to meet me violently. I found myself entangled in a tree well, snow compacting around me like quicksand. Shoulder deep, arms pinned, I was stuck. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind, rapidly overtaking rational thought. My heart pounded erratically, each beat echoing the seconds ticking away. I shouted towards the now distant piste, but the words were swallowed by the snow and the emptiness around me. My frantic wiggling only sank me deeper. I felt like an insect ensnared in a spider's web, helpless and alone. I reached for my phone, but it slipped from my grasp, burying itself somewhere in the snow below. I continued shouting till my voice felt strained. I was stranded and my energy drained, each breath shallower than the last. I genuinely wondered if I would make it out at all. Just when it seemed like hope had gone, I heard an engine's growl in the distance. Relief washed over me like a warm wave. Through the thickening gloom, the silhouette of a piste basher emerged. It was one of those machines used to groom the slopes, its front lights cutting through the dimness like the eyes of a mechanical savior. The machine came to a halt. The driver, clad in a full balaclava and a head torch, climbed down holding a shovel. As he approached, my heart soared. Rescue was within reach. I couldn't see his face, but that didn't matter. Help was here. He gripped the wooden handle of his shovel tightly, but instead of reaching down to help me, he drove the shovel's blade into the snow with a force that was clearly calculated. As I watched from the tree well, expecting a rescue, The man began to shovel heaps of snow onto me. I screamed at the guy to stop. What was he thinking? Why was he doing this? My brain struggled to make sense of it. Was this some sort of sick joke? But there was nothing remotely funny about the weight of snow compressing my chest, making each breath an agonizing struggle. I was being buried alive. My arms were already weakened from efforts to free myself, so fending off the additional weight was impossible. The snow reached my neck, then my mouth, pressing against me like a vice. This was it. I was going to die. That's when I heard the swooshing sound of skis cutting through snow. The man in the balaclava paused, his grip on the shovel tightening. He looked up and saw another skier approaching at breakneck speed. For whatever reasons, the Peace Basher guy seemed to weigh up his options. He chose to retreat. He dropped the shovel, clambered back onto his machine, and sped away, melting into the darkness. The skier arrived just in time. He dug away the snow covering me, finally freeing my arms. Exhausted but alive, I took in gulps of air, each breath tasting like a second chance at life. Not a word was spoken as he offered me a water bottle and guided me back to the main piste, where my friends had initiated a frantic search. They enveloped me in a group hug, relief visible on their faces. The skier, who I later learned worked at the mountaintop restaurant, reached me just in time. I'm driving cross-country through a maze of dark, winding back roads. My eyes dart to the dashboard as the gaslight flickers on. I tense up. I should have stopped at the last town. Just then, my headlights catch a sign. Service station, next exit. The exit leads to an even more desolate road. I remember the tires crunching on gravel as I pull into the station. The station building itself is small, windows tinted and dust-caked. The faded paint and peeling sign make it look as if it's been decades since its last renovation. The attendant emerges, a middle-aged man in a greasy uniform. The name tag says Dave, but it's so tarnished that I can barely make out the letters. He doesn't speak, just nods toward the fuel pump. I roll down my window and hand over my credit card. He swipes it through an ancient card reader and starts pumping gas into my car. The attendant's movements are slow, deliberate. His eyes carefully avoid mine, focusing on the pump as the numbers climb. I glance inside the station through the window. Nothing but a few shelves stocked with motor oil and stale snacks. No other customers, no other employees. I shake my head, dismissing my escalating paranoia. I look at my phone on the passenger seat. No signal. Not unusual considering the location, but it amplifies my discomfort. I tap my fingers on the steering wheel, glancing again at the attendant. He's almost done. The pump clicks and he screws the gas cap back on. "Receipt?" he asks, his voice as flat as the landscape. "No thanks," I said, eager to leave. I take back my card, put the key into the ignition and turn. A brief sputter of the engine, then nothing. I try again. Still nothing. Rolling down the window, I call out to the attendant. "Something's wrong with my car. It won't start." He ambles over with feigned concern. "Mind if I take a look?" He lifts the hood and peeks inside, his face unreadable. "Could be the battery. I'll get a charger." He returns to the station, and I watch him closely. He picks up a jump starter and a walkie-talkie, hooking up the cables to my battery first. Then he speaks quietly into the walkie-talkie. "All set," I hear him say. He returns to my car and unclamps the cables. "Try it now," he suggests. I turn the key, and miraculously the engine roars to life. "Thanks," I mutter, but the relief is fake. "No problem," he says, walking back toward the station. I engage the clutch, ready to accelerate into the night, but the car sputters and dies again. My heart plummets. Something's not right. I grip my phone, still lacking a signal, and pretend to make a call. "Yeah, I'm almost there. Just a small hiccup with the car. See you soon." I speak loud enough for him to hear, hoping to buy some time. I see him pick up the walkie-talkie again, but hesitate, unsure of his next move. Seizing this momentary lapse, I take out a small pocket knife from the glove box. Fingers trembling, I step out and lift the hood again. The battery clamp is loose. I tighten it, praying that's the only issue. I rush back into the driver's seat and try the ignition. The engine sputters but holds. I don't wait. The car lurches forward as I slam the gas pedal. Gravel flies behind me as I peel out of the station, not daring to look back until I've put considerable distance between us. When I finally glance in the rearview mirror, I see him standing there, walkie-talkie in hand. I drive without stopping till the service station is long gone behind me. I've no idea what he had in mind for me, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I arrive at Aunt Marie's place on a crisp Monday morning. Her house is miles from civilization, surrounded by dense woods. She's off on holiday, and I've volunteered to house sit and look after her cat Whiskey. Working remotely has its perks. The house is older, Victorian in architecture, with creaking wood floors and high ceilings. The first night is uneventful except for the distant sounds of what I assume are raccoons rummaging around. The cat curls up on my lap, seemingly unperturbed. My laptop screen casts a pale light across the room as I work, and I find the atmosphere almost comforting. By the third night, the noises are getting more pronounced. Random bangs reverberate from downstairs or maybe from the walls, it's hard to tell. I look out the window once or twice, but there's only darkness. I decide it must be the house settling or animals outside. It's an old place, drafty, full of quirks. I focus on my work and push any concerns aside. The week passes slowly. I adjust to the nocturnal rustlings and creaks, and the cat seems to be in good spirits. On the final night, I decide to cook a nice dinner for myself. Aunt Marie will be home tomorrow, and I want to leave the place in top condition. I spend extra time cleaning the kitchen, ensuring every dish is put away, every surface wiped down. The silence in the house feels heavier tonight, but I shake it off and make my way to bed. The same unsettling sounds come and go, but by this point I'm too tired to care. I drift off to sleep, lulled by the wind outside. I wake feeling refreshed and excited to return home. I can't wait to sleep in my own bed again. I stretch and head downstairs for a coffee. As I reach the kitchen, I freeze. Every single cupboard is wide open. Pots, pans, and dishes are untouched, just exposed. The silverware drawer is ajar. I stare, unable to comprehend. I approach cautiously and touch the edge of a cupboard door. It's cold, as is the air in the room. I walk through the house, noting nothing else is amiss. The front and back doors are locked from the inside. Windows are shut. There's no sign of intrusion or struggle. I check on Whiskey, and she's sleeping soundly on the couch. I return to the kitchen and slowly start closing the cupboard doors. I notice the basement door is ajar, so maybe that's where the cold draft is coming from. I head down the stairs to find a cluttered space with mostly just storage and utilities. I pull the string for the lone light bulb, illuminating a circle on the concrete floor. Everything appears normal. Boxes are undisturbed, old furniture covered in dust sheets. As I'm about to turn and leave, my eye catches something. It's subtle but unmistakable. A single footprint in the dust on the floor, leading away from the stairs. I follow the footprint with my eyes, scanning the dim corners of the basement. The trail stops abruptly, vanishing against the far wall. My skin crawls. I rush back upstairs, lock the basement door, and sit at the kitchen table. My laptop is there, my work, my semblance of normalcy. But the open cupboards have shattered that. The quiet of the house is no longer comforting. Aunt Marie will be back soon. I ponder whether to tell her, but what would I say? I can't explain it, can't rationalize it. I only know that I was not alone in this house. And for the first time, I question what else I've been sharing this space with for the past week. I had been driving for hours through a desolate stretch of highway. Nothing but barren fields on either side. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, and I felt the weight of isolation settle on me. When the sign for a rest stop appeared, a muted promise of civilization, I decided to pull over. A stiff back and heavy eyelids warranted a break. The rest stop was a simple setup, 4 parking slots, one of which was occupied by a truck, a small building for restrooms, and a couple of picnic tables. The pale glow from the overhead lights gave it an almost eerie quality, amplifying the stillness. There were no sounds, just the distant humming of my idling engine. I got out of the car, stretching my limbs and scanning the surroundings. Nothing moved. The truck that shared the lot looked like it had been there for a while, engine off and cab dark. I shrugged off a vague unease. It was just a rest stop after all. The restroom building was a single structure divided into male and female sections. Pushing open the creaky door to the men's room, I was hit by the stale scent of disinfectant mixed with dampness. A flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead. I approached the urinal and did my business, avoiding eye contact with my reflection in the tarnished mirror above the sink. As I turned to wash my hands, I noticed something scrawled on the wall beside the mirror. In hurried, almost frantic handwriting, it read, "Don't stay here, he watches from the truck." A chill went through me. I scanned the restroom, now seeing other scribbles that I'd missed. "Leave now. Not safe." Messages etched in varying degrees of urgency, as if over time, yet seemingly by the same hand. I turned off the tap, my hands still wet, and walked briskly back to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and stared at the truck. Nothing moved. Was the warning real? A practical joke, maybe? My gut told me not to linger. I turned the key in the ignition, and my engine roared to life. Just then, the truck's cabin lit up. My eyes met those of the driver through his side mirror. He started his engine. I didn't wait. Foot on the gas, I sped out of the rest stop and back onto the desolate highway. The truck followed, headlights casting elongated shadows on the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. A relentless dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The highway stretched on, a never-ending ribbon flanked by empty fields and punctuated by the occasional road sign. No other cars, no houses, nothing. I pressed harder on the gas, watching the needle climb on the speedometer. The truck kept pace, neither falling behind nor overtaking. I thought of calling the police, but realized my phone had no signal and I was scared to use it at high speed. My mind raced, searching for options. I could either try to outrun the truck or find a way to lose it. A sign appeared ahead announcing a fork in the road. I slowed down slightly, feigning a move to take the right, but at the last second, jerked the wheel left. The truck hesitated, then committed to the right fork. My heart pounded as I floored the accelerator, pushing the car as fast as it would go. I didn't stop till I got home. Dawn broke over the mountains, a gray mist hanging low in the valleys. I looked up from my harness, my fingers aching as I tightened the ropes. My gear was light. I'd done solo climbs before. But this mountain, this isolated peak in the Canadian Rockies, promised a different kind of solitude. No trails, no signs, just me and the jagged cliffs. I scaled the first pitch with ease. The only sounds were my breath and the faint scraping of metal against rock. Hours slid by as I moved up the face of the mountain. The remoteness began to weigh on me, but I was chasing something pure here, a kind of quiet only reachable in places where even the wind holds its breath. Mid-afternoon, I took a break to hydrate. That's when I saw a lone climber on a parallel mountain, his silhouette barely visible against the dark rock. Odd. This area was remote, rarely climbed. I raised my hand in a half-wave, and he did the same. A sense of camaraderie crossed the distance. Then he began shouting something, his voice swallowed by the wind and echoing caverns between us. I squinted, trying to read his lips, his gestures, but it was like decoding a foreign language. His arms flailed in increasingly frantic motions. I stared, confused and a bit alarmed. What was he trying to tell me? Was he in trouble? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows. I pushed onward, dismissing the climber's antics. The peace I had initially felt was now tainted, its purity disrupted by the distant figure who seemed desperate to communicate something. Suddenly, the sky lit up, bright red and orange, as a flare streaked across the narrow gap between our mountains. It hissed as it flew, landing with a soft thud just above my head. I flinched, my heart pounding. Was this some kind of twisted warning shot? An act of aggression? What was going on? The other climbers' yells grew more desperate, but the words were still a garbled mess, lost in the chasms of air and rock that divided us. I decided to hurry, eager to reach the summit and descend before darkness fell completely. I would navigate away from whatever danger that madman posed. It was me in the mountain. This was supposed to be a sanctuary, not a war zone. Finally, I saw the summit, bathed in the dying embers of sunlight. My body ached, my mind was frayed, but relief washed over me. I was almost there, almost free from whatever threat lurked below. I scaled the last stretch, my hands grasping the top ledge. That's when I heard it, a low growl. I froze, my eyes scanning the summit's plateau. Nothing. I pulled myself up. Another growl, closer this time, echoed from above. My heart sank as my eyes adjusted to the dimming light, making out shapes that shouldn't be there. Wolves. A pack of them, their eyes glowing a soft, malevolent yellow. In that moment I understood the warnings, the flares, the frantic yells from across the abyss. They had been stalking me, using the mountain's shape to mask their approach, coming from above and below. The pack moved closer, their growls deepening, reverberating through the bones of the mountain and into my very core. My options vanished, consumed by the encroaching darkness and the circle of predators closing in. The climber on the other mountain was no longer visible, but his final, desperate shouts echoed in my ears. My hand reached for my backpack, desperately feeling around for the flare gun I had packed for emergencies. With a swift, fluid motion, I pulled it out and aimed skyward. The flare shot out, a bright red comet ascending into the gathering dark. It burst in a halo of crimson light illuminating the mountain's summit. The wolves recoiled, yelping and skittering back, their eyes squinted against the sudden blaze. I didn't wait. Clutching my gear, I began the hurried descent down the opposite side of the summit, away from the pack. Each foothold was a gamble, each drop of the rope a prayer muttered through clenched teeth. The flare's light faded, but its glow fractured the night just enough to give me my window of escape. The desert road stretched out in front of us, a barren landscape, only interrupted by the gray of asphalt beneath our tires. We were driving back from visiting relatives in Nevada. My wife glanced at the kids in the rearview mirror, their faces illuminated by the glow of their devices. She asked them if they were hungry. They both nodded, and we agreed we would stop at the next service station. A few more miles passed until we saw a sign for a diner at the next exit. The restaurant stood alone, surrounded by nothing but dust and sky. An old neon sign flickered open. We parked and went in. The bell above the door jingled. A man behind the counter looked up. His eyes lingered on us. He was alone. No other customers, no other staff. Just rows of empty booths and a jukebox that played something half familiar. "We're out of a lot. What can I get you?" His voice was dry, like the air outside. We ordered some simple items that he did have, alongside some sodas for the kids and coffee for us. While he brewed the coffee, the sky outside started to turn. A dust storm was forming. He noticed us staring out of the window. "Storm's coming. Better stay a bit." We sat in a booth sipping the bitter coffee. The man brought over a plate of stale pastries, insisting they were on the house. He sat down at the counter, reading a newspaper but glancing up at us periodically. The storm hit and the wind howled, shaking the diner's windows. Dust particles hit the glass pretty hard, which frightened the kids. Visibility dropped to near zero. We were stuck here for a while. Time dragged. The man started humming to the jukebox, and from the corner of my eye I could see him subtly eyeing us up. I noticed my wife tightened her grip on her coffee cup. We made eye contact with each other, both silently acknowledging the weirdness of the situation. I felt my pulse quicken. The kid seemed uncomfortable, picking up on our tension. I needed the restroom, so I headed down the narrow, dimly lit hallway. A door ajar caught my eye. Inside, I saw stacks of personal belongings. There were tons of bags, wallets, clothes, shoes. I remember thinking it was way too many for one person. Maybe it was donations or a garage sale. That's what I wanted to believe. But something didn't sit right with how strewn they were, or how little they'd been handled with any care. It just didn't feel right. When I returned to my family, I told my wife we should leave. Right now. She agreed. The man looked up. "Leaving so soon? Storm's still out." I forced a smile. "We'll take our chances." "Suit yourself," he said. But his eyes were no longer casual. They were sharp, calculating. We moved quickly, gathering our things and ditching $10 onto the table. The kids sensed the urgency. The man stood up and walked to the door, as if wanting to say goodbye. My eyes met his, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding. He knew that I knew. The wind still screamed outside, but there was a lull in the dust storm, a small window of visibility. Our chance. I grabbed my wife's hand. "Now!" We ran out, shielding our faces from the dust and debris. The car was only a few yards away, but it felt like miles. The man stepped out of the diner, shouting something we couldn't hear over the wind. I fumbled with the car keys, my fingers trembling. The car roared to life. I floored the accelerator, tires skidding on gravel before finding grip. We left the diner behind, its neon sign flickering until it was swallowed by the dust storm. We didn't speak much after that. The storm began to dissipate, the dark sky giving way to a twilight. Days later, we saw a news report about a missing family. They'd last been seen at a diner in the desert. Police found the place abandoned, a newspaper still open on the counter. I looked at my wife, she looked at me. We said nothing, but we held our kids a little tighter that night. We were planning a 3-day hiking expedition and hired this guy, Jack, to be our wilderness guide. He was listed on Craigslist, with decades of experience in leading people through the most isolated terrains. When we met at the forest trailhead, his eyes studied us briefly. "This isn't a walk in the park," he warned. Dressed in earth-toned gear, boots that had seen miles, and a hat that hid most of his face, Jack was the epitome of rugged outdoor living. His equipment was minimalistic but functional: machete, compass, and a sturdy backpack that he told us was filled with all you'd ever need to survive. The forest welcomed us with open arms. Giant pine trees loomed over us like guardian spirits. As we walked deeper, a solemn quiet settled over the group. We had left behind the safety of our daily lives, moving farther away from civilization with each step. Jack's initial behavior seemed cordial, professional even, but as the first day wore on, small quirks started to emerge. He would occasionally stop dead in his tracks, looking up at the towering trees or scanning the underbrush. He seemed to be searching for something, though what it was he didn't say. Our first night was spent beside a babbling creek. The fire we built seemed like a futile attempt to keep the encompassing darkness at bay. Jack didn't join us. Instead, he sat a few feet away from the campfire, his eyes fixated on the water's flow, scribbling thoughts into a worn notebook. I ventured to ask what he was writing. "Notes," he said, his eyes not meeting mine. "Always good to keep notes." We awoke to a heavy mist that draped the forest. Jack led us further into the wilderness, moving with an uncanny sense of purpose. As the sun climbed higher, we began to encounter unsettling signs: clearings with charred wood like old campfires, but with no paths leading to or from them. The first trap caught us all off guard. A hole dug deep into the earth, camouflaged by leaves and branches. "What's this, Jack?" someone asked. "A deterrent," he replied, so softly we could barely hear him over the wind rustling through the trees. The traps escalated in complexity and cruelty. Snares fashioned from twine, spiked pits filled with sharp stakes, even a makeshift tripwire. They seemed calculated, premeditated, a stark contrast to the untamed wilderness around us. As the day faded into twilight, Jack's behavior took a turn. He would periodically glance at his wristwatch as if waiting for a specific moment. He resumed an unsettling humming, but now it was interspersed with mumbling. When night fell, there was no talk of setting up camp. "We walk," he said, his voice strangely tranquil. As we moved under the cover of darkness, a terrifying scream pierced the air. We all rushed to where the sound originated, flashlights scanning the dense foliage. Nothing. No sign of an animal, no indication of a struggle. Just Jack standing amidst the trees, wearing an unnerving smile. On the third day, it became clear. We were not here for the reasons we thought. Jack seemed more unhinged, his mannerisms increasingly erratic. He led us into a secluded clearing, surrounded by trees so tall they blotted out the sky. "We're all here for a reason," he mumbled, pacing around the circle he had instructed us to form. He unpacked his bag, revealing an assortment of items: a knife, a coil of rope, a flask of murky liquid. He picked each one up in turn, almost reverently, muttering words under his breath that sounded like a mixture of instruction and incantation. He started waving the knife around wildly towards us. He lunged out and cut my buddy across the forearm. There was a mad struggle as we managed to overpower him. There were more of us after all. My pal, Jimmy, was a football player, so he was pretty hench. He butted heads with Jack, sending him to the floor. It gave a momentary pause to get out of there. I ran as fast as I could, my breath shallow, my heart pounding. My lungs were on fire, my vision blurry, but then we stumbled upon an old logging road, overgrown but recognizable. Fueled by a newfound hope, we sprinted along the track, not daring to look back. The journey back from Burning Man was supposed to be a cool down, a gentle transition from the surreal to the mundane. That illusion shattered when our beat-up van coughed, sputtered, and died in the middle of the Nevada desert. Cell service was a myth here. We waited for hours, hoping some good Samaritan would pass by. None did. The isolation definitely started to get to us. When darkness began to stretch its arms across the sky, we spotted headlights in the distance growing brighter. Finally, a tow truck from a local rescue service pulled over. 2 men stepped out. One was tall and skeletal, the other shorter. Both wore dirty overalls. The skeletal one asked if we needed help, but didn't wait for an answer. He circled our van, kicking its tires as though appraising an animal at auction. They agreed to tow us to the nearest service station, but insisted the van could only carry 2 passengers. We'd have to squeeze into the back of their truck. It was unconventional, but we had little choice. Mike climbed into the truck bed, whilst I had to sit in the front with the 2 men. The truck's interior was a museum of oddities. Faded photos of women were pinned to the ceiling. A collection of antique feminine trinkets cluttered the dashboard. I swallowed my fear. The truck ambled down the lonely road, further into desolation. Finally, we reached a dilapidated garage that looked like it hadn't seen business in years. The skeletal man jumped out and opened the truck bed. "You both wait here. We'll check the van." They left us in the dimly lit garage, van still hitched to their truck. Eventually, I broke the silence. "This ain't right." Mike tried to reassure me, but I saw doubt cloud his eyes. We started exploring the garage cautiously. A curtain divided the space, and behind it were shelves full of old, faded Polaroid pictures, full of people tied up and looking distressed. A pit formed in my stomach. The men returned. They explained that they'd need to keep the van overnight. We could sleep in an adjacent storage room. I wanted to object, but felt paralyzed. Something told me not to argue. The room was grimy and airless. As the door closed behind us, I heard the lock click, confining us in darkness. My eyes met Mike's, and I saw my own dread mirrored his. We barely slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the corrugated metal walls, tightened the knot in my stomach. In the pale light of dawn, the door unlocked. The shorter man entered, carrying a tray of stale bread and water. He looked directly at me. "We need help with some chores. Come." Mike and I exchanged glances, but I refused to follow them out. "Suit yourself," said the short man, and he slammed the door shut. The door locked again. The tension was unbearable. Mike finally spoke. "We have to get out of here." We examined our makeshift cell. An old rusty pipe ran along the ceiling. With some effort, we managed to break it, fashioning a makeshift crowbar. It took an agonizingly long time to jimmy the lock open. We stepped out into the empty garage cautiously. We knew we had to leave. As we tiptoed back to the front of the garage, we saw the 2 men in a heated discussion near their truck. They hadn't noticed us. Whilst they were distracted by their arguing, we seized that moment to sprint towards the road. Behind us, angry shouts dissolved into the distance. We didn't stop running until we reached another road, hitching a ride from the first car that passed. The driver was a middle-aged woman heading to Reno. She listened to our story in horrified silence. Once in Reno, we reported everything to the authorities. They found the garage, but no sign of the men. They'd vanished, melting into the desert. The Polaroids were gone too, but we knew what we had seen. We were the lucky ones. The van's engine grumbled as it snaked its way up the winding road. I peered through the misty window, eyes squinting to make out the details of the surrounding landscape, towering cliffs, lush green foliage. This was the infamous death road in Bolivia, and the drive had been an uphill battle since dawn. Sitting in the back of the van, sandwiched between bulky bags and custom-built downhill mountain bikes, the discomfort was intense. These bikes weren't your regular cycles. Built for resilience, they boasted mega suspension systems designed to absorb the harshest bumps, curves, and rocky terrains that the death road could offer. A sense of assurance wrapped around me just by looking at them. We finally reached the starting point. Our guide, a gruff man with a noticeable absence of humor, briefly ran us through the safety guidelines and hand signals. Helmet and gloves on, I straddled my bike, testing the grip, feeling the responsive shocks under me. With a push, we were off, downhill, wheels against the wet, muddy road, and the wind in my face. On the way down, I saw crucifixes and small memorials where people had gone over the edge, presumably losing their lives to the steep cliffside. The road was extremely narrow in places, but our thrill-seeking group surged onwards. But here's where the death road lives up to its name. A sudden tight curve, and my front tire got caught in a rut, catching me off guard. Before I knew it, I had lost my balance. With a sickening crunch, my bike tumbled off the narrow path, and I was thrown onto the jagged rocks below. My knee hit first, and the pain exploded like a starburst. For a few minutes, I lay there, gasping. The agony was intense, almost blinding. My knee was swollen, blood oozing through my torn pants. I tried to call out, but my voice died in the wind. All around me was the sound of my own labored breathing and the unsettling silence of remote wilderness. The trees loomed tall, like quiet spectators to my plight, and the path ahead was empty. I realized the group had moved on, not noticing my fall in the downhill rush. Despite my agony, I had to move. Slowly, laboriously, I propped myself back on the bike, fighting off waves of nausea with every pedal stroke. My knee screamed in protest, but I needed to catch up, or at least make it to an area with some sign of human life. Fog pressed in like a smothering blanket, obscuring everything beyond a few feet in front of me. Time stretched, warped by my pain and isolation. Minutes felt like hours, but I saw no sign of the group. Every twist and turn of the path looked the same, disorienting, remote. The loud murmur of a distant waterfall only served to intensify my sense of aloneness. As I navigated another curve, my front tire hit a loose rock. For a split second, I teetered on the edge, staring into the abyss below. The cliff was a sheer drop, nothing but empty air for hundreds of feet. By some miracle, I regained control, my heart pounding louder than ever. Finally, I approached what seemed like a makeshift rest stop, a dilapidated shed and a rusty signboard. Still no sign of the group, but the place looked like it had seen human activity. I leaned my bike against the shed and settled myself down on a flat piece of rock. My phone showed no service, no surprise there, but it felt oddly reassuring just to hold it. The remoteness of this place crept into my bones. Any initial sense of adventure had long evaporated, replaced by a haunting realization of just how alone one could be in such a vast landscape. It wasn't just the physical pain that was unbearable now. It was the staggering isolation, the silent trees, and the empty road that stretched out both ahead and behind me. And so I waited, every minute stretching longer than the last, hoping to hear the distant sound of bike tires against gravel. Anything to break the isolation. Eventually I did hear it, a soft murmur growing into a recognizable hum. My heart leapt as the group rounded the corner, their faces flushed from the ride but shocked upon seeing me. As they tended to my injured knee and radioed for an emergency evacuation, I looked back at the road I had traversed, beautiful yet unforgiving. The guide assured me that help was on the way,